And it can be very difficult to overcome PTSD. But the thing is, you can point to the trauma. You know when it started, you know when it ended. With complex PTSD, there's no start point and there's no finish point.
So I wanted to ask you, the clients you work with, trauma and complex PTSD, what exactly is that? I honestly never heard of complex PTSD.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that.
This is one of my favorite questions because the more people that know what this is, the better, because it's so much more prevalent than we think. I also had no idea about 4 or 5 years ago what complex PTSD was, but I was having so many PTSD symptoms and additional symptoms on top of that. Like, for example, always feeling like I was looking through a glass wall, like I was separated from everything else. Like random stuff that I couldn't put my finger on, but I knew I wasn't okay. Very easily activated in my nervous system where my emotional responses to things would be so much bigger than the situation called for, and I couldn't control it. So I went away for a weekend. I lived in Texas at the time. I went to the silos at Magnolia and I got an Airbnb and I was just Googling, just doing all of this research. I'm a researcher by nature. And I found a book called Complex PTSD From Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. I downloaded it on my Kindle and I read like almost the whole book that night because for the first time ever, I recognized myself in words. I was like, he's writing about my internal experience. This is crazy. Like I thought I was nuts, but he's telling me exactly how I feel. And so that sent me on this journey of understanding what complex PTSD was. So basically, PTSD is from a trauma that you can point to.
Okay.
So you can say, I know that my parents got divorced, or I know I was in a car accident, or I know I was a soldier in war. And it can be very difficult to overcome PTSD. But the thing is, you can point to the trauma. You know when it started, you know when it ended. With complex PTSD, there's no start point and there's no finish point. It's basically for the most part, it's people who were born into chaotic family systems where that was your norm. So literally your brain is wired like backwards.
Okay.
Where you learn so early to constantly live in survival mode. So you're in hypervigilance, constantly, always scanning your surroundings because everything was dangerous. Nothing was healthy. You didn't have healthy attachments to people. Your caretakers were unpredictable. This can also happen in adulthood. If you're in an abusive relationship, you can get complex PTSD as well. But more often it comes from childhood where the trauma was your life. It's not something you could point to in your life.
Wow. I find it fascinating. I've just hearing it for the first time, what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I never even knew that was a thing, and it makes so much sense though. Mm-hmm. It really does, because everybody's a product of their environment, right? No matter how the environment looks. Mm-hmm. But if you constantly had to be in an environment every single day where it was just, you're triggered and just basically like living off of adrenaline, mm-hmm. you don't know any different.
Yeah.
And so you as an adult, it's almost like you got to be able to engage with like your parasympathetic nervous system and be able to calm down and almost rewire your brain.
Yeah.
In a sense, right?
Totally. Absolutely.
So once a person recognizes that, is that something that they can overcome, or is it just, what does that process look like? Do you get to beat it and overcome it, or is it something you live with, but you know how to navigate through life?
That's a really good question as well. Personally, I think for the most part, you can heal complex PTSD. There are a lot of differing opinions on this. And in fact, in the USA, CPTSD is not part of the diagnostic manual, the DSM. It is everywhere else in the world, but it's not here. So literally here, if you're going to school as a mental health practitioner, etc., you have to explore it on your own.
Wow.
Because the treatment for it is completely different than it is for regular PTSD. So you need to find practitioners who really know what they're doing, or coaches who really understand CPTSD. But what you have to do is teach your system what it feels like to be safe. And that safety and security are actually healthy, because you've learned that chaos, insecurity, and not trusting anyone was the only way to stay safe.
Yeah.
Which causes a lot of chronic illness. It causes depression. It causes suicidality. It causes so many things. And I didn't even realize that this is what I was struggling with, because it was my normal. Until I had kids. It was my kids that really opened my eyes to that.
Well, so go ahead and tell us more about that. So you have 2 kids.
Yes.
Fina and Emmanuel.
Yes.
And they're absolutely precious.
Yes, they are.
So tell us more about that.
So my first child is Emmanuel. He's a 10-year-old superstar that we adopted from Ethiopia. And he was little when he came home. He was 15 months old. And we were completely naive. We had no idea about attachment trauma and the different kinds of things you could encounter with an adoptee, which really makes me angry. I do a lot of advocacy now for adoptive parents, just so that they know what they're walking into, because we were young, like we didn't know what we were doing. This was our first child. And the only thing that our agency had told us was, if your child is older, here's an extra class that you can take. Our child was younger. He was 15 months old. And so there was kind of this assumption that what affected him isn't going to affect him long term. He might have an adjustment period, but it's not going to affect him long term. But within 2 weeks of him coming home, I could just feel in my gut, like something is off. This isn't how it's supposed to be for him. This isn't how it's supposed to be for me. But I was a first-time mom. I was still in that mode of second-guessing anything that I would say to myself, because that's part of CPTSD. But I started to dig into it, because even like medical professionals would say, no, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. So I had to keep like believing myself, there's something not right. And I uncovered that he was really dealing with attachment trauma, in addition to so many other things that we can't even name because we don't know his full history. We just don't know. But it was through that experience of doing the research for him that I looked at myself and I said, my son and I are dealing with the same crap.
Yeah.
Which was hard for us, because we'd hit up against each other like, you're hitting my wounds, but I'm the adult. I'm like, okay, I know that I am wounded and having a hard time parenting this child who's wounded. So I have got to go get help for myself. And through that work, I found so much about what it means to be attuned to, like to have someone in your presence who actually hears you, empathizes with you. I learned how to parent in an attuned and connected way with this kid who was literally scared of intimacy, scared of love, scared of the world, scared of having a good time, because if he was going to have a good time, he would freak out that something bad was going to happen, or he was going to get taken from us, or like something like that.
Oh.
So he would rage against happiness. But it was the biggest gift. I always say that was the biggest gift, I hope, for both of us, because we've been able to grow and heal together. And it was because of him that I uncovered this whole world of like attachment and safety and learning about how to heal from trauma.